Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. Claire Chambers is the founder of Meadow Lab, which develops plant products that accelerate the creation of biodiverse and high-performance landscapes. Meadow Lab is focused on the native plant space and has developed a wildflower sod that makes installing meadows faster, easier, and more scalable. I recently spoke with Claire about trends in the native plant category and how growers can balance sustainability with production and economic challenges. Here's our conversation. Well, I want to start with your own background, both as a grower and then how that eventually led to the creation of Meadow Lab. And then if you can talk more about what Meadow Lab is and what it does.
I come into this as a bit of an outsider, not from a growing background, but I have been sort of fast tracking that education for the last few years. So my education in native plants really began around the time I bought a house, and I think that that's probably true for a lot of homeowners, because when you buy a property, you're suddenly acquainted with all these plants, and if they're perennials, you start to see them year after year, and it's a very slow way of learning, but a very beautiful one too.
Yeah.
Over the last few years, as I started to get interested in this wildflower sod product, that's when I really started getting hands-on, and it was actually one of the first things, even before I started the company and actually began building Meadow Lab. I started testing the product and growing it at a trial site in my hometown up here. And really just trying to understand all I could about how it would work, and, that gave me, of course, a crash course in a lot of different things from irrigation to, cold stratification and germination
Yeah.
substrate materials. So, it's been a journey so far.
Nice, nice. We should talk then about exactly what Meadow Lab is and then about what wildflower sod is then.
Great. Yeah, so Meadow Lab is a company that I founded last year. We're focused on bringing native ground covers like wildflower sod and hopefully some other products as well to market as a way of helping landscapers sort of rewild the built environment in a sort of more rapid and maybe more practical way. And
Yeah.
so one of the products that as I mentioned, that we're bringing to market is called wildflower sod,
Mhm.
and it's essentially a meadow, in a sod format. So we are, growing uh, native meadow plants, grasses and forbs, in a sod system, and then transporting it the way you would a roll of sod, if it was turf grass for your backyard, and allowing people to put that down and kind of have a faster way to establish a meadow. So we're really excited about that product and its ability to allow homeowners to get meadows into the ground faster.
Okay, nice. Now I know you mentioned native there a couple times. So I know there can be confusion sometimes in the market over what exactly is a native plant and how does that tie into everything. So from your perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's that's a tough question, and what is native? When we think about native, we're talking about plants that have evolved with the place around them, and at the same time, like probably many of the growers you speak to on this podcast, we're working to try to figure out how we can commercialize products that within a particular area, right? And so our when we talk about native, we really mean that they have at one point in time were growing, in the wild in our area, that they have co-evolved with the life around them, and most importantly, functionally, will be really strong and robust plants that can weather, droughts and handle the sort of the natural wildlife, and contribute to the wildlife that's around them.
Yeah.
But that said, it's very interesting to see the use of that word, and also to see the various amounts of concern or attention to that label. We have one seed mix that is 100% native, and again, when we say that, we mean that to our region, right, where we're
Yeah.
growing. And then we have another mix that does include some naturalized species that do grow on the roadsides here and around, but maybe we're not always here. And both of those mixes, I think, have a place, in the environment. It just depends a little bit more on what the homeowner or landscaper wants to see.
Okay. Yeah, and then I sometimes equate native to look at the same way that you sometimes refer to local production, where it's going to mean different things based on who you're talking to. It could be, within a few miles, could be within a few hundred miles, but so the definition kind of varies a little bit, I think, depending on who's working in that market.
Yes, it definitely does. It definitely does. And we use it more as a tool for, what is our plant palette that we can design with, right? And
Yeah.
then pulling in from there. But I know it's a bit of a buzzword and a hot item these days.
Yeah. So as you've been working with, growers on how to, you know, build their native plant portfolio and working, with the landscape community as well. Um, Any thoughts that you have on, there's balancing sustainability with, you're also a grower that, is faced with various production and economic challenges. How do you kind of balance some of those needs so that you can be both sustainable and, economically profitable as a company?
Yeah, I think that's such a hard balance to get right. Because obviously there are so many things we want to, my Meadow Lab really is, I mean, first of all, we're a public benefit company, which means that we're a for-profit business, but we have another bottom line, right? Which is, trying to have a positive impact on the world and
Right.
specifically biodiversity. But that said, the day-to-day challenges of running a business are very much, part of what we have to grapple with. And so, I think it really comes down to values and trying to really hone in on what those are as a company and then try to
Sure.
work those into every part of the growing system. Um, and at the same time, there are things that we would probably love to do, like, for example, paying attention to every single ecotype, ecoregion, and
Yeah.
producing a product that fits every ecoregion would be a fabulous goal, right? And we would love nothing more than to do that. But from a commercial perspective, that would be really difficult commercially. And so I think, figuring out what's important and then having that as sort of a guiding principle through everything you do is sort of the way that we've been focused on it. And for us, what that means is our sort of mission and reason for being is really to get more, wild, beautiful, biodiverse lands into the world. And the way that we're going to do that is by making them affordable and making them scalable.
Yeah.
And those two things, in some ways, sit in contrast to one another. And that's what we need to work out. And I'm sure we'll spend years and years figuring out how to balance those two sides of the coin as we grow.
Oh, sure. And if you look at this from a higher level, so then like, how are you keeping track of, because I know a lot of this is driven by what consumers are asking for, especially the new wave of plant consumers that this industry has gained through and then coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. How do you keep track of those consumer trends and, monitor what they're looking for and how the industry and companies like yours can respond then?
Yeah, it was funny. I was just listening to a podcast you did with Katie at Garden Media Group, and that's one way we can keep track of trends.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways going to nurseries, and especially I find trade nurseries, right, wholesale nurseries, is a great way to understand what landscapers and landscape designers are asking for.
Yeah.
It can be a little circular at times, but I think that that's a great way. I find that, Instagram, as much as we love to hate it, is an amazing way to stay on top of the landscapes. Our clients who are landscape designers are designing and what they're paying attention to and what they're thinking about and what's on top of their mind. So that's
Yeah.
a very sort of important outlet for us. And then, I think equally importantly, I think when you think about this industry we're in and particularly the state of where it is today, my hope is that this idea of native goes beyond a buzzword about nativity
Right.
and really gets into an idea about function, right? Ecological function. And I think if you take that thread, then one of the ways to see trends is kind of to look at what's happening in nature, right? And what are those very functional landscapes that are created by nature, what does
Yeah.
it look like, right? And is there a way for us as either landscapers or growers to emulate that and create systems that people can install that emulate that? So that's something that's inspiring to us as we think about building products.
Okay. Well, and you look too, and I hate to even use the word buzzword when it comes to something like this because it's really not that, but you know, taking something like that and creating a purpose out of it. So it's not just, I'm going to be a grower that's going to, sell native plants and incorporate native plants into my offerings because, I keep hearing about it, but I'm going to come up with an exact reason and strategy and a long-term goal with this. So I definitely appreciate where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept, and I think, like anything, when you know, as I understand it, and of course I'm a little bit newer to this industry, but native plants have been around a long time, but there's been a real inflection point, right, when it comes to the mass market talking about them and consumers wanting them and asking for them, and that of course builds a whole flywheel that we're lucky to be in the middle of.
Yeah.
But I think when we think about the future as growers, we have an opportunity to go beyond what is a native plant and what isn't into how are we going to change landscapes in the US to be more resilient, to be less sterile, to be more alive, more reciprocal with the world around it. And I think that's the real opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too, from the perspective of, for example, an independent garden center or retailer, what can they do to what kind of tools can they provide for their customers to educate them about native plants and why they're so important? That's a big part of this industry. You have the wholesale, but you also have the retail side, which I mean, they have a lot of face-to-face connection with the consumer. What kind of things can they do to, explain what natives are and how they can be incorporated?
Well, there's the signage is clearly happening. I'm seeing it all over nurseries. I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah.
And I think that it can go a step beyond that into helping people understand palettes that go together, plant palettes, right? Because it's one thing to choose plants for their ornamental value or their beauty, and it's another to put together a system of plants, a community of plants, to use another buzzword, that are actually working together and filling in. And one of I mean, just in my own experience as a gardener, I think one of the most transformational things that probably happened in my own backyard was this idea. I was talking to a friend who's a landscape designer in my area, and she suggested that I plant Aster ericoides or snow flurry
Okay.
beneath my other plantings. I had a lot of natural, tall, I had little blue stem and I had a bunch of other native plants. And the idea that I had never thought to plant there, right? I'd always thought you sort of put mulch there, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that there is this other foundational layer that would not only make my garden more beautiful, but actually served, it added beauty in the fringe season, right? It added ground cover throughout the year. It reduced weeding. And so this was early on, maybe a few years ago before I really got into Meadow Lab in earnest, but it really blew my mind a little bit because I had never been taught that you could plant there. And so I think that idea of changing planting from here's an ornamental plant in a sea of mulch that I keep carefully pristine to what is a layered, multifaceted arrangement. I think that is happening and shifting, but we have a long ways to go in educating the consumer about it.
Yeah, well, and it's funny too because I think about how a grower looks at the seasonality of this industry, and they might do 80% of their business within a 6 week period or so, and they look at ways to extend their season. I'm thinking that's kind of parallel to the discussion we're having here, where you might be a homeowner who's planting a garden, and you're going to plant it in the spring, and it's going to go through the summertime, and then you're done. But if you're talking about building a year-round ecological landscape almost that can thrive in different ways, that's a way for the consumer to extend their own season, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think, designing meadows, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing, it gives you a crash course in that, right?
Yeah.
Because a well designed meadow has a beginning of the year, it has a middle of the year, it has an end of the year, it has seed heads. And it also evolves over multiple years. And so there's really kind of this craft to the design. And of course, that's what really great landscape designers do in plantings in people's yards all the time, right? Is make those decisions and use their knowledge to do that. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting and hopefully lucrative for many landscape designers and growers to be able to lean into something that is a new education for people.
Okay. So as you look ahead then, what are some of your goals then, both for, how Meadow Lab can continue to grow, and then I guess maybe your own thoughts on just the future of this industry as a whole? What excites you about the future, not just of what Meadow Lab can do, but also the future of floriculture as a whole?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, a meaty one. I mean, so at Meadow Lab, we have our work cut out for us. We're obviously very early in our journey. This is our first year of commercial production, and I will. Nobody probably listening to this podcast needs to hear this besides me. But I will say, growing at scale is so different than growing in small trials, right? And so. The learnings alone that have come from the first few months of commercial production have just been, wonderful and hard and interesting and meaty. And so we have a lot of work in front of us just to continue in our mission to develop an amazing product that works really well and is really beautiful. So that's a lot of what's ahead of us. I probably in the next few years, but. R&D in plants takes a long time, and so we are working on a bunch of additional items as well, whether they be alternative ground covers. We're doing some research with some research institutions, and really trying to make sure that we are thinking past the meadow into other ways that we might help people create functional landscapes, beautiful and functional landscapes in their backyards. So I think
Yeah.
we have our work cut out for us in that, and I feel lucky every day because it's a lot of fun to work on, new products that maybe don't exist yet or maybe don't exist at scale yet. Um, when I think about the future, I really hope there's kind of this meshing of what is beautiful in landscaping and floriculture with what is functional and
Sure.
and what is also biodiverse.
Yeah.
Because if you've read Doug Tallamy's work, and like we are in a very precarious spot when it comes to our food webs, and the moths and the caterpillars, and that these birds rely on, and not to get all existential here, but it's kind of a scary time. And so I think in addition to helping homeowners find beauty in their backyards, hopefully we can also start to understand how do we make a dent in creating impactful landscapes as well. So I hope that the industry is going in that direction, but just like other threads that we've been talking about, I think it'll take a while, right? And maybe we're just at the beginning of that beautiful trajectory.
Yeah, and I think a company like Meadow Lab can play a key role in that. We talk a lot about the consumers that this industry has gained in the pandemic, and how do we make sure that they continue to stay involved in gardening and landscaping. I think this is one way to go about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I was not in this industry during COVID, but I can really appreciate because I was in a almost similar business in the home space that experienced a huge boom during the pandemic.
Sure.
Um, and that is the challenge, right? Is how do you keep people's interest in a moment when life goes back to normal, so to speak? I mean, I don't know if we're looking at a normal time, but but we certainly can see the impact of that. And I definitely think we're partnered with a company in England that has produced wildflower sod for about 20 years, and so
Okay.
that that partnership gives us a little insight into what's happening in England. And I like to think of a lot of what they're doing, certainly with meadows, but maybe also with plantings, is ahead of us, right? And certainly with some legislation they have around biodiversity and biodiversity net gain.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the energy that we all got for our gardens during COVID, hopefully will give way to a new era that is about sort of longer term stewardship.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.